Invincible Season 2 is back again this week on Amazon Prime with a brand new episode entitled "In About 6 Hours I Lose My Virginity to a Fish," which, you know what, if they gave awards for episode titles, I think that one would win all of them. Now, I'm Cape Joel, and this is the video series where I give my thoughts and feelings on the episode that was, while also shouting out any comic book Easter eggs or references I can find. So with that out of the way, let's get into it, shall we? As we join the newest episode, it's graduation day for Mark's class at Reginald Vell Johnson High School, and again, it blows me away that between the name of the school and that the principal's name is Winslow, and that he's voiced by the real Reginald Vell Johnson, that this is all just one giant Family Matters joke. Here in the middle of a big superhero show, and I am certain that like 70% of the audience does not even get that joke. Of course, Mark Grayson is late for his own graduation as he's hard at work fighting a returning Doc Seismic, and it is Doc Seismic, not Professor. You see, he never taught. Though the Doc's not alone this time, as he's joined by the Magna Knights, who we actually saw for a split second at the end of the last season. Actually, a lot of this episode seeks to pick up hanging non-Omni-Man related plot threads from Season 1, which is always nice to see. Also, in a fun bit of progression, Mark was able to defeat Seismic on his own in this episode, where last time it was a group effort between him and Adam Eve, though Mark wasn't able to save the Washington Monument, though, which Cecil is sure to ream him over. The question quickly becomes, what will the future hold for Mark and his friends? Well, William and Amber dream of fun, carefree summers. It's clear that Adam, Eve, and Mark couldn't be further away from these ideas, as their lives have been irreparably changed over the last few months. Speaking of Eve, she actually gets a really hard-working subplot this episode involving her attempts to clean up the damage left behind by the big Battle of Chicago, as well as Eve continuing her more grassroots approach to superheroics, mainly helping people in need, like rebuilding an apartment complex and giving them a whole brand new park to play in instead of punching bad guys all the time. Things get really complicated though when Eve's douchey parents end up blowing back into her life. Seems like they've fallen on hard times ever since Eve's dad lost his job at a furniture store after their head office was destroyed in Chicago during the big fight. And while Eve wants to use her amazing powers to try and help them, she's rebuffed at every turn. This is actually a pretty nuanced take on the classic bad, unsupportive parent archetype. Yes, they suck, but they also don't want to exploit Eve for the money or for her abilities. Yeah, her dad is stubborn and he's overly proud, but also, as we learn, he also doesn't want to co-sign Eve's use of her powers. You see, that park she built ended up being on unstable land, and the whole thing caved in after she left, meaning that despite her best efforts to cut red tape and help the little guy on the streets, Eve gets a very harsh lesson this episode in why red tape exists to begin with, and that you can't just simply super your way out of every problem in life. Again, this is where the deconstruction part of Invincible comes into play. Why don't heroes just do blank with their powers? Well, this is why they just don't do blank with their powers, because it doesn't always work out. The massive emotional divide between Mark and his mom is also a major focus of this week's episode. It's clear that neither of them have really processed their loss, choosing instead to throw themselves into the respective work, and home is becoming a tenser and tenser place because of it. I find it interesting Debbie's first attempt to reach out to Mark is by saying that they should take a trip together, which was always something Nolan seemed to do when the going got tough, and it's also a trick that Mark pulls out later with Amber by taking her not to Paris, but to Vegas instead. Again, it's a nice little subtle thing here. Mark says he fears becoming his father, yet he hasn't stopped to think about all the ways in which he might already be acting like his dad. Speaking of Debbie, she also gets a fun little side plot to herself this episode, wherein she loses her cool with a potential homebuyer who treats his wife like crap. Again, I like all the stuff the show has given Debbie to do. It's a major improvement over the books, wherein she just kinda goes to pieces for a number of years, understandably. It's a reminder too that even though Nolan is gone, he continues to haunt his family, and that there's still so very much left unsaid between all of them. As far as Invincible himself goes, you could really sum up this episode with that old saying, the sins of the father always fall upon the son. Cecil dispatches Mark to Midnight City to deal with a new and more brutal Darkwing who's been running around. Midnight City obviously being a parody of Gotham City, right down to the fact that it's always night there 24/7. Also, the story Cecil tells about the city getting cursed by a mage in 2002, yeah, that's directly from the book. And wouldn't you just know it, turns out the new Darkwing is actually none other than his old sidekick, Nightboy. Well, actually, he hates the term sidekick, almost as much as he hates Invincible, seeing him as nothing more than the son of a mass murderer who is surely just a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Now, unlike the original Darkwing, this guy comes packing powers. We get to see a very cool action scene where an Invincible is pulled into the mysterious Shadowverse. It's here Mark actually shows his creativity in a pinch by just grabbing onto the new Darkwing and refusing to go unless he takes him back with him. If If you like Darkwing 2, don't worry, because in the books he was actually redeemed and actually joined the Guardians of the Globe, and I don't see why they wouldn't do the same thing here in the show as well. But you know what? The old business doesn't stop there either, as we're also reminded of the Martians and the Sequid threat from last season. Turns out one of those astronauts, Russ Livingston, is actually a Martian in disguise who's having a very hard time dealing with all the different complexities of Earth. Oh man, I feel ya. After losing his job at NASA and getting inspired by the dead Martian man, Russ tries to make a go at becoming a real hero himself and joining the Guardians of the Globe as a new hero called Shapesmith. Actually, in the books, Shapesmith caught the Guardian's eye by defeating Dr. Seismic and not the returning Lizard League, who are actually making their first non-special appearance in this episode, I do believe. And hey, speaking of the Guardians, and they continue to struggle under the new leadership of a mortal who proves to be a hard-ass taskmaster. No one seems to suffer more, though, than Rexplode, who the show actually tries to create some sympathy for this episode when he learns that his ex-duplicate is actually with a mortal now. Damn, talk about an age gap. You know, in the books, Rex actually does have a sad and sympathetic backstory, and I wonder if the show will ever let us hear it. Maybe he'll get in the next special, who knows. Really, as far as I'm concerned, you just can't go wrong with more Jason Mantzoukas in your life. The big action set piece that makes up the latter part of this episode actually comes when Mark is forced by Cecil to take a trip to Atlantis and answer for his father's murdering of their old king. At first, it seems like Invincible may be forced to marry the Queen Aquara, thus the very funny title of this episode, but no, in reality, the Atlanteans have changed their savage ways, and instead, Invincible will need to win a trial by combat, fighting to the death with a massive, horrifying sea beast. Also, hey, people with good ears may have been able to pick up that that was Tatiana Maslany, the She-Hulk herself, voicing the Queen in this episode. One of these days, we're really gonna have to sit down and create a whole Venn diagram for actors who have been in both Image properties, DC properties, and Marvel properties, aren't we? Mark, as is so often the case for him, goes in cocky against the Beast and quickly gets overwhelmed. Cecil gives him a chance to back out, but once the Beast ends up free and more Atlanteans' lives are threatened, Invincible decides to do the very thing his father would never do and actually go back to help, because indeed, being a hero is all about being willing to make self-sacrifice. Even for people who were trying to kill you just a minute ago, it's only after getting his ass kicked again and ultimately saving the day that the Atlanteans figure, hey, you know what, maybe we should let bygones be bygones on this one. If nothing else, though, Mark and his mom both end up at home at their absolute lowest, and from dodging her at the end of the last season and rebuffing her early in this episode, Mark and his mom are finally able to share in their collective sadness, a first good step to moving forward, if you ask me. But hey, you know what, it wouldn't be a superhero show without a post-credits scene, and in this one we get to see Angstrom Levy is jumping between worlds, punishing multiversal versions of Mark Grayson, and so far he seems to be getting pretty damn good at it. And so that was in about 6 hours I lose my virginity to a fish, and it was a lot to take in. I wondered what season 2 of the show was going to look like when season 1 clung so very tightly to the big Omni-Man mystery. And if this episode is any indication, the major theme this time around seems to be about Mark being forced to answer for what his father did and the toll it's taking not just on him, but on everyone around him as a result. It's also fun as an adaptation that the show is a lot freer to jump around all 144 issues of the main comic and kind of pick and choose what stories they want to follow up on each week, while also being sure to pepper in some pretty entertaining side plots with the Guardians, with Debbie and Eve, so Mark doesn't feel like he needs to hold up the entire show on his lonesome. Overall, I definitely like this one. I'm excited to see what next week will bring with it. And so that'll just about do it for me, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to let me know down in the comments section. Feel free to share this one around on social media. It certainly helps me in this crazy YouTube attention retention game. So until we meet again, everyone, this has been Cape Joel, and I will see you all next week. Bye-bye.